In our last section of the lecture video, I left you with this question: what is the role of the epidermis? And you probably discovered that it is all of the above. I'm sorry, endodermis, in case I said epidermis earlier. The endodermis is a layer of cells inside the root. So the epidermis is around the outside of the root. The endodermis is further inside, and it is between the cortex of the root and the vascular tissues. And the vascular tissues is where the water is going to be going up and down. So the endodermis prevents water from entering this vascular cylinder by the apoplast. Remember, it forces water to go into the cells. So if we use my model again, and I'll just kind of take this apart, but if we use this model, and with this Casparian strip, the water cannot go in between cells, and so the water instead is forced to go into the cell and through the cell membrane because it can't pass between two cells. These two cells would be blocked off by the Casparian strip. And then secondly, the endodermis forces water and minerals to pass through a selectively permeable membrane, and this helps the plant to filter what is going to get into the vascular tissue, which makes sense. If there's something poisonous in the ground and you absorb it into your roots, you don't want to take it all the way to the leaves if it's poisonous. So the selectively permeable membranes of the cell help to filter what gets in. And so that kind of leads us up to letter C. It regulates the kinds of substances that are absorbed from the soil and conducted to the rest of the plant body. So the endodermis does all of that. So how are the following materials absorbed by the root cells? Pause the video for a moment and answer this. How are water and mineral ions absorbed? And what I'm looking for is the short distance transport mechanism. Would it be diffusion, osmosis, facilitated diffusion, active transport? What would it be for water and mineral ions? Well, for water, I hope you said osmosis. Osmosis is the diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane. So water always moves passively by osmosis. So root cells absorb water by osmosis. And then mineral ions can either be absorbed by facilitated diffusion or by active transport. So it depends on whether the mineral ions are in higher concentration in the soil than in the root, in which case it would be facilitated diffusion, which would require some kind of a carrier or a channel protein, or active transport if there's a low concentration of minerals in the soil and the root is using energy to absorb those in. And we already saw how the root does pump hydrogen ions, so it uses energy to pump hydrogen ions into the soil, and that acidifies the soil and helps the root to absorb positive ions. But how does material move once it gets inside the root? How does the material move all the way up the xylem, all the way up to the top of a tall tree? So the question that we want to ask ourselves is the xylem sap mostly pushed upward, or is it mostly pulled upward from the top? Is it mostly pushed upward from the bottom by positive pressure, which is how our circulatory system works? Our heart pumps blood, and by positive pressure, our blood is pushed all the way through our circulatory system. Or do trees, do trees kind of have pumps that push water up, or do they have some mechanism of pulling water from the top? Well, they kind of do both. So there is some pushing of xylem, or pushing of the sap in the xylem by root pressure if there is a high concentration of solutes inside the root and a lower concentration of solutes outside of the root, then osmotic pressure would draw water into the root, and that would push water up the xylem. However, this can only happen over very short distances. So here we see a picture of a leaf. It's actually like 3 leaflets of a compound leaf, and you can see that there are little droplets around the edges, and it might look like dew, but this is actually water that is being pushed up from the roots and pushed out through the stomata of the leaves. And so we call this guttation. This is the exudation of water droplets that have been pushed up by root pressure. So this can happen if it's a humid day and if the soil is really wet, and there's a higher concentration of solutes inside the plant, and that draws water in by osmosis, and it just pushes up through the plant. But like I said, this can only push water a short distance. So I'm going to stop this video here, and I'm going to ask you to watch another YouTube video by somebody else, not by me, and then I'm going to ask you to answer questions in your next quiz question.